Hi y'all, how you doing? This is chapters 12 and 14. I've smushed them together, and I also have a little section on soils because your book doesn't cover it at all, but you need it for your lab, and I think frankly you need it for thinking about how the environment is impacted by some of the things we're going to talk about. So I'm going to add in a little bit at the beginning of this that is not in the textbook, and then so I'll do it as 3 little videos. The beginning part, this part is going to be just about soils and how soils work, and you'll need that to answer your questions for the lab this week. Then I'll do the other ones will be food production and then geology. All right, so let's get started. As you know, this is Alice, and she's going to help with lecture today, apparently. And so I want to talk a little bit about soil and the lectures for this week. The info in this PowerPoint is helpful to you to answer the questions and go ahead and look at your lab itself. You're going to take a sample of soil from the place where you have been sampling all along, where you made your column, and then it's going to ask you to go through 2 days worth of experiments with it. Part of it is going to be looking at soil structure. Part of it is going to be looking at how good that soil is for growing things like crops, and also be a little bit idea of what kind of pollutants are in it. We aren't testing for things like heavy metals. I don't have access to that. More for, is this good for planting or not? So I want to go over this idea as we come through the class. Is agriculture is incredibly important to us as humans, and agriculture really describes everything from farming fruits and vegetables all the way to the way we farm animals and all of the structure that's built around that. Everything from the actual raising and caring of creatures and plants to harvesting, and food and not food crops, things like hemp, which we generally don't eat but can be used for clothing, or wool, and we're not going to necessarily eat the sheep, but we're growing the wool. Those things count as agriculture. And this is something humans do really, really well. You all in your population responses and discussion, talked a lot about how humans have really dramatically changed our environment, and agriculture and the Green Revolution, which we'll get to, are ways that we've done it very recently in a way to sustain many, many more people. The problem is our way of farming has been fairly unsustainable, and the consequences of that have become apparent now and in the last 150 years. And so we've had to change on many levels the way that we farm to support the number of people, but also to support the world and keep it a place that we can continue to farm for generations to come. Soil is a resource to us. It is technically a non-renewable resource, or I guess it's technically renewable, but it renews very slowly, about 1 millimeter per year. When we degrade it, we can degrade it at 25 millimeters or more per year. It is incredibly important that we manage our topsoil in the place where we actually grow roots and the plants that feed us. It's incredibly important we manage that in a way that maintains the soil for generations to come, because once we lose it and it washes out to the ocean, it's not really accessible for plant growing anymore, and then we don't have any place to grow food. Soil has 4 main roles. It is a place where plants grow. It stores our water. It keeps a water supply for us. In New Jersey, a lot of our water either comes from the Delaware River, depending on where you live in New Jersey, in southern New Jersey, or from the aquifers in the Pine Barrens. The aquifers in the Pine Barrens are basically underground lakes that are purified because the water has rained through the soil and been filtered clean. It also helps to maintain the balance of all of the nutrients cycling around in our atmosphere. There's carbon stores and nitrogen stores, phosphorus stores in our soil that are not cycling through, and that's a good thing. We want to keep them in the soil or move them through the soil on the way to their normal biogeochemical cycles. And also it's a place for living. This is Bada's pocket gopher. I don't know how this is going to show up on your screen. He's right here. And worms, so many worms. Soil is made up of some basic components. We're going to look in your lab at a lot of these. You're going to go out and collect your soil sample. I am going to suggest to you that you spend a little bit of time taking the organic material off the top while you're in the field. So scoop it up, but then take all the leaves, pull the worms out, give yourself a couple minutes to scoop it clean, because otherwise you're going to end up with a soil sample that's very difficult to read, or you'll be kidnapping worms from their home. Soil is made out of sand and gravel. Sand is very fine little particles. It's also made up of silts and clays. Silt is incredibly fine. It basically will suspend itself in water. Clays are very heavy. They're finer than silts. And so what they happen is they will stick together, and they are literally the clay that you make little pots out of. Locally, where all of you are sampling for your columns, you should have not too much clay in your soil. If y'all head up into Burlington County and up through Morristown and above, the soil gets a little bit heavier in clay. You'll come off the outer coastal plain, and into the inner coastal plain you'll get more clay. So depending on where you're sampling, I think you'll probably get a little bit of clay in your sample, but not a lot. Organic material, fauna and flora. Fauna means things that are animal-like, and flora means plant-like. And then water and air. You're going to measure the porosity of your soil. That's how many pores it has. That's important because the fluffiness of your soil allows the things like roots to grow through. That's one of the roles of earthworms in soil management, is they move through the soil, they break up organic material, but they create space. And fluffy soil holds more water and it holds more air. This is a soil triangle. I'm asking you as part of your lab to figure out what kind of soil you have. You're going to figure out the percent clay, percent silt, and percent sand in your sample. And then you literally yours will have proper numbers on it. You just follow the percent clay across the middle, silt down this way, and sand across this way. And where all three of those lines meet up, that's the type of soil you have. Loam is best for agriculture. That's what, if you sample at a farm field, you're likely to find some loam. Soils in the Cerrado, which is part of Brazil, are very heavy in their clay. This is part of Brazil that is used for a lot of soy farming. Over the last couple decades, Brazil has really had a movement to increase their agriculture of soy. They have been able to take the very acidic Cerrado and add a base to it and turn it into something that is ideal pH-wise for soy, but it's a heavily clay soil. And so when the very thin top layer that supports root growth is used up, it erodes away, that soil becomes unusable for almost everything. The Cerrado in Brazil is an area that is plains. It is very similar to the American West plains where the buffalo roam and where we have a lot of grasses and sedges. The difference between the North American plains and the plains in the Brazilian Cerrado are very much the depth of the clay soil. Our plains in the northern northern west part of the United States are very full of loam. It's deep, rich soil that is incredibly good for agriculture. It's very, very deep in the part where the roots actually go. That means it supports a really healthy series of crops from generation to generations. Theirs is full of clay, and that's become a problem over the last decade because they've used up the little bit of topsoil and they're down into a place where they can't plant. I'm going to give you a visual here between sand, silt, and clay. This is a particle of sand. It's, say, let's 0.05 millimeters. Compare it to a particle of clay, which is this thing right here, very, very fine. Silt is in between. And you are going to let gravity do your work for you. This is why your sampling is going to take so long for the next day or so when you do your soil samples. You're going to collect it and then allow it to separate the sand, silt, and clay out so you can determine the percentage of each in your sample. Very low tech and very easy to do. I want to show you here the difference. This is the American West and this one is the Cerrado. This clay layer compared to this clay layer, the little bit of arable, farmable land on the top in the Brazilian Cerrado is very thin. It's hardly marked up here. Whereas this is the very arable land where roots can grow in the plain states. We're kind of in a region where we're really lucky and able to farm well because our soils are healthy and thick. The fauna that you find inside of your soil sample are going to be pretty diverse. Some of you have already been seeing springtails in your samples from the river, so I know you're going to get them in your soil, but springtails are one of my favorite. These are Collembola. They're not quite insects, but they're close. They are hexapods. Things like the snails, worms. I think in your soil sample you'll see a bunch of these. It's a whole community there. Plus, add in all of the bacteria that lives in. This is a very living part of the earth that we don't tend to talk about in ecology classes until sort of the very end. When we want to add this and make it fluffy, we want more pores in it. We aerate it. We add air to it. Worms and other creatures also fluff it up. They create tunnels and add air to the soil. I want to point out too, there's a lot of mycorrhizal symbioses. These are fungus. It's right here. These little fungal associations are found with almost every single kind of plant that we have in our region. You can even, when you buy soil, you'll see that they're already inoculated with fungus. Myco here means fungus. Rhizal means root. These are fungal root associations that they've kind of gotten sensationalized in the last couple, 5 years, where a paper was published that said that trees use these mycorrhizal networks to talk to each other, and then people started getting the idea that they made them like the world fungal web or the mycorrhizal web, and when they did that they were somehow friendly with each other because of this. There is the possibility of communication, but it doesn't mean that everybody is communicating in a way to help everybody else. They're just interpreting each other's chemical signals in this. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. Their plants aren't friendly with each other. They're still competing for resources. They just happen to all be connected together in a way we didn't understand. Your soil layers, you're going to dig down, and when you take your soil sample, you're going to dig down through the horizons, the layers of it. The O horizon is the organic layer, and right underneath it is the A horizon. This is where our plants grow. And our crop. This is where our food comes from. That is also what you are sampling probably as you bring up your sample for the next experiment. I'm less worried about these. I made them red because I wanted to talk about them, but I'm not really going to ask you quiz questions about them. Below the A horizon is the alluviated, it's the washed out, it's mainly clay. For us, it's a lot of sand in New Jersey. And then there's the subsoil. Below that is bedrock. And here in New Jersey, if you dig down that deep, you're going to hit water. In other places in northern Pennsylvania, or northern New Jersey even, you're going to hit rock. The parent material is the type of rock that this soil has actually accumulated on. The A horizon is where food grows, and it differs depending on where you are in the world. You saw that in the Cerrado in Brazil, that soil is very clayey with a very thin A layer. It has a lot of compactedness, and it's very difficult to grow plants in. Our soil, a lot of our soils are mollisoils. These are areas you can see in North America, in parts of South America, and across Europe and into Asia. These are areas where soil has been laid down under prairie grasslands for much time. Those prairie grasslands have grass that has really deep roots and leaves a lot of organic material every season, and they result in these really thick A layers, topsoil layers. They're really good for farming. We also, in the US and across Northern Europe and into Asia, parts of Africa and South America, and even in Australia, we have a lot of alpha soils. These are soils that also have really thick A layers. They're incredibly important for farming. These soils formed underneath deciduous forest. I want you to real quick look, and we'll look again as we go later into the lecture, but look at the location for all of these soils and then think about where people live. People don't, and I'll go back and forth here. People live in places where there are not a lot of available soils, kind of like where we live on the coast of New Jersey. but that doesn't mean that we don't have access to that. Because of modern farming practices, we have access to food grown in really good soils. There are parts of the world, back here to here, where there are no available types of soils that are really good for farming. That is really going to impact the availability of farm food in those areas. Arable land is not evenly distributed. Arable means farmable. There are parts of the world that do not have much arable land, and a lot of people live, not in Australia, nobody lives here. I mean, they live in Australia, but not in this blank part. A lot of places in the world where there's a lot of people and not a lot of arable land. There's not a lot of people here, but this is Brazil. When we look at that, we could see excuse me, that some of the places where people live are less available to have good quality food resources that are local. And so we have this idea of, if it's uneven distributed, we have been, as people, able to distribute food around the world because we can have the technology to either grow food in places where it is less ideal, or to carry that food and preserve it for a long period of time. What we have been able to do with a series of green revolutions, which we talked about during the population bomb, but I'm going to come back and bring it in, is this idea that we have been able to use technology to make up for the fact that we don't have as many resources as we need. And so we are raising the carrying capacity by using technology. We've actually been really good at doing this with farming across the world. 500 years ago, for this, if you had the same number of people on planet Earth, a majority of the land would have to be farmed. But with modern technology, we've been able to retire some lands that aren't great for farming and focus on lands that are good for farming. What has actually happened is the amount of land that we farm on Earth has gone down a lot in the last 200 years because we've gotten better at intensively farming areas that are easier and more productive to farm on. Every single year, and we're going to come back to this as we talk about geology and sort of sustainable practices in farming, every single year 3 million hectares are lost soil-wise by erosion. And erosion is just when the soil washes off into the water and into the ocean. It happens slowly or really rapidly depending on the weather. And as this happens, the organic material that is protecting that area is lost and it becomes unusable as soil. We'll talk about kudzu, and I feel like we talked about it a little bit. One of the reasons kudzu was introduced to the United States and is now an invasive species is it's really good at gaining a foothold in poor soils where erosion is a problem. It was introduced as an erosion control method, and it's been super successful. It grows in places where nothing else grows, and it grows really rapidly. I mean, maybe it's not ideal biodiversity-wise, but it certainly is working to contain erosion. In the U.S., too, a substantial amount of our land is slowly being converted into not farming. We've reforested most of the East Coast because we don't farm on the East Coast as much anymore. We farm out here in the Midwest, up here. My picture is not drawing very well. When we do that, that concentrates all our food resources in one area, but it also means lands that were impacted by farming and maybe less biodiverse can be allowed to return to the sort of nature that they were at one point. Overview, that is just an overview that you need for the lab and other ideas in soil. I will go ahead and continue on to chapter 12. I know I'm asking you to do a little bit of extra reading this week, so I'll mitigate that with some of the other things we're doing. This is good background for where we are going. The rest of the lecture that this covers is going to talk about, sort of ways that we manage sustainably our food production, and also a little bit about how the planet Earth actually works. It's good timing because, as you know, we're about to send people. We just did. They're circling the moon now. I think they're on the other side of the moon in a couple hours. So we're going to look at the Earth as a whole and then come back and look at it in little pieces again, just like they're looking at Earth right now. And I'll see you in the next video. I'm going to end that one there, and I'll see you in a little bit.